Hi, I'm jjbarnes and you're watching another episode of The Table Read. Welcome back to The Table Read with me, jjbarnes. I am over here giving creative writing advice, tips, tricks, techniques, things you can use to give you the confidence and the ability to get your story out into the world. Today I'm going to be talking about how to write offensive characters. Now I'm talking about characters who are racist or homophobic or misogynistic, who are violent or just generally just terrible people who say and do very offensive, terrible things. Now, there's a bit of a way about society at the minute that suggests that if a writer includes really offensive content in their story, that it's them and it's their truth and their feelings. And I fear that that leads us to sanitize our writing, to stop including the terrible truths of our world because we're scared of being cancelled or just accused of agreeing with this content. And that's really dangerous to me because stories need to deal with and address some of the toxic ways of the world. Or how do we learn from them? Putting these behaviours under a magnifying glass, exploring them through story, doing something like that can be very powerful and have a lot of effect. And story needs to deal with terrible things because the world has terrible things. So what I'm going to be talking about is how I think we as writers can include these characters, but still being respectful of the fact that this is terrible. Does that make sense? Dealing with offensive and toxic issues in a way that is respectful to the people who those issues are a day-to-day existence and life and actually have real life, real-time consequences. So here is my advice. If you are writing, say, an incredibly racist police officer, somebody who is aggressive and bigoted and hostile and uses the kind of language that we culturally are trying to stop people using. I'm obviously not going to say any of this stuff because A, I don't want to, and B, I'm not trying to glamorize or make this a dramatic thing. I'm not going for clickbait here. If you write that character, you can have them doing and saying all this terrible, terrible, terrible stuff. But you need to have it countered, in my opinion. You need to have it countered by characters who are shown to be good people, trustworthy people, who acknowledge and address the problem of what that character is doing. You could have a whole host of characters, all driven to do terrible, terrible, racist, bigoted, aggressive things. But you just need one person to acknowledge and recognize how terrible it is. And that's your moral compass of the story. If you make sure that your audience is introduced to that character as a positive person, as somebody who is the audience's access to the story, then every time one of the characters does something racist and hateful, that character can respond and tell the audience that, the truth that is terrible. Doesn't mean you can't include that content. Doesn't mean that you can't have that conflict active and terrible things going on that are being part of your story, as long as it's acknowledged that it's terrible. By giving that moral compass to a character who you establish as trustworthy, you are respecting that good, trustworthy, honest people reject that behaviour. And that's incredibly important because that is establishing that terrible things happen. Bad people exist. They do hateful, heinous crimes. Use just really foul, degrading language for other human beings. But that society's moral code rejects it. Does that make sense? I have written about terrible things. In Emerald Red and the Coven of Seven, women get burned alive. Terrible things. But Emerald, the protagonist, moral compass here, she fights against it and tries to stop it. In Mermaid's Curse, mermaids pulled out of the ocean and butchered, like alive, have parts of their bodies chopped off them while they are trying to survive and captive. But Lily and Saffron fight against it. They're the moral code. Now, in Mermaid's Curse, there are also morally ambiguous characters, characters who you might like, who are interesting and good characters and provide a middle ground of morality. But you're not like hooked onto them as the moral compass of the story. The protagonists, Lily and Saffron, firmly against it. Absolutely pure of heart and driven to end that practice. You get to explore it. You get to have the pure bad, driven to hurt people like the Harvester. You get to have the morally ambiguous characters who talk about it, why it has good consequences. Like, discuss the middle ground because it's interesting. It's a good conflict. It's a fascinating thing to talk about a middle ground, because that grey area is where such story can be mined. And you can do that literally with everything. There's so many people who have a sort of grey area on racism where they're like, oh, but this, but that, right? Explore it, write about it, because those people exist. Like, humanity isn't just good, bad, honest, liar. Most of humanity exists in that grey area, so explore it. Like, give voice to those opinions and explore that conflict. Just make sure you have a moral code, a moral compass that steers the story against the offensive, terrible actions that other characters take. That is my advice. I hate that society seems to be demanding everything be bland in case somebody's offended. It's such a waste of art that it can't challenge and it can't address things that are difficult and terrible and complicated, because art should. We should be able to explore the worst of the world, and we should be able to try and find humanity in our enemies. People aren't 100% anything, but however much humanity you explore in them, and however much maybe you give them a backstory that humanizes them and makes them more sympathetic, just make sure somebody is solid and true against that offensive behaviour. I think that is the way we should be able to do it. So thank you very much for watching another one of my videos. I hope this has been interesting. I hope it makes sense what I'm saying. I aim to make sense. If you strongly disagree with me and think, no, we should not cover any of these topics because they are offensive, just comment and tell me why. I disagree, strongly disagree. But I'm always open to discussion about it and to maybe see what our middle ground could be. What else? Subscribe to this channel because I'm putting out videos every week trying to, inspire and teach and guide and give you confidence to do things with your stories. And what else? Go to the table read. And I think that's it. So thank you very much for coming back for another video, and I'll be back in soon. Bye.